So good evening, everyone. This is our Tuesday night Dharma gathering, and our topic tonight is death and dying, which was in the wind, has been in the wind for several weeks, various situations. But in particular, I did not know that my dear lifetime friend Clara Taylor, who basically was my second mother since I was 2 until today, passed away today. It's kind of auspicious in terms of us talking about death and dying today. So I'll be including her in our conversation and in our thoughts, in our heart and mind. And this is the sort of mothership topic as far as spiritual practice goes, and different traditions treat this topic different ways. As you know, it's sort of like where we kind of project our ultimate fantasy, in a way, in terms of spiritual fantasies, materialistic fantasies, whatever we've gathered in terms of our mind. And when we think about death and dying, that's kind of like going to really sum up and express our understanding of life itself, the way that we handle that particular topic. So of course we're going to be looking at it tonight from the point of view of the Buddhist teachings, since that's the framework we're gathering in. But I thought we could also look at it as just fellow beings, folks on a train from here to there, which is really what we are, and have plenty of time for conversation, dialogue about this topic. So I'd like to dedicate this to Clara, who was represented a lot of the qualities that we often talk about on these broadcasts, in terms of being a really good, solid human being, and generous and kind and compassionate. I tried to think of a single incident in my entire life where she was anything other than that, and I couldn't. Not one. So this is, very deep to see this kind of, these qualities so fully developed in somebody we know, who doesn't really make any pretense to be a bodhisattva or a spiritual teacher or anything like that. But I think I did get a certain dimension of my understanding of what it means to be a human being from Clara. And so I want to dedicate this to her. When we look at this topic, obviously there's one, it is the elephant in the room. If the room is all of life, everything we want to talk about, any topic we want to talk about, the ultimate topic is that life as we know it, as we hold it together, as we conceptualize it, as we experience it, ends from a certain point of view. And that, even though every human being, every other kind of being, we human beings think about these kind of things, and other types of beings maybe just it's more instinctive in terms of their relationship to wanting to survive. I'm not sure they sit around and make, if the squirrels on my property are having Dharma discourse about death and dying in their trees, but who knows. But every being that is born into this world, that as we know it, is going to die. So it's so completely true that it's something that I guess people can argue about a lot of things, but really you'd have to be kind of nuts to make an argument against this particular truth. So it's not just that, like if you think about disease and scourge and war, and plague and famine and all those, blights on that we talk about in terms of catastrophes in history, tsunamis, hurricanes, all pale in the face of death itself, as far as being complete experience that comes to everybody, whether it comes to us as a group or it comes to us individually, and whether it comes to us when we're younger or older, or even as a baby, or as the oldest person. My doctor, Dr. Beer, great name for a doctor, don't you think? Told me that he was caring for the oldest person on the planet. It was 111 years old. I guess maybe he doesn't know some of the Taoist masters living up in the mountains who are like hundreds of years old. But in terms of, kind of known entities, this guy was 111, and Marie said he was his doctor, which was bringing him a certain amount of notoriety, but the guy died. So, even the oldest person in the world is going to die. And the truth is, we say this in Buddhism all the time, we know that death is coming, we don't know where and we don't know when. And, we live as if we will live forever. That is sort of a fundamental twist in our knickers, in our consciousness, that we're somehow living as if we're not aware of that fact. And even in sort of relatively conscious people, we might even still feather it a little bit by coming up with some fancy philosophies about what we think might happen. And, we could talk about what it is that reincarnates and think, well, we will go on forever in some form. But as we'll see, talking about it in the Buddhist context, it's not really us that reincarnates. I have, kind of bad news for everybody. It's not your personality. It's not your set of memories. It's even if we're going to go down that road, which we'll talk about a little bit tonight. So the kind of narrative or the hero of our particular drama at the moment is gonna end. So you could look at that as kind of horrifying news, which is it's so ironic in a way that most people look at this as a trauma and as a kind of tragedy, but it's just universal truth. It's just the way it is. And nobody says when somebody's born, what a tragedy this person is born. We celebrate and we have all kinds of ceremonies and things like that. So, our understanding of the process of living and dying is thin a little bit. And it's very much sort of wrapped around two poles, mostly. One is sort of our narrow sense of ego, and the other is our perhaps broader but might be diluted sense of what the big picture is in which our individual consciousness exists. So that we think, well, there's no particular problem, or we're just part of the universe or something like that. So I would say the two poles of delusion that we face are, one is sort of overemphasizing our individual existence in terms of attaching so much emotional energy to it. And the other might be a kind of naivete or kind of unexplored aspect of the power, you could say, the power of cessation of the particular existence that we have, how powerful that is for people. So we're going to look at both of those poles, see where we fit in on that. Also, there's a physical process of death when the body dies, and then there's, you could say, a psychological component to it, or mind consciousness goes through certain steps, which we'll talk about from a sort of classical Buddhist point of view, but also try to make it a little bit experiential, so we can see if we can actually touch into some of these things and make it a little more personal, a little less theoretical. So, it's a sure thing. It's a sure bet. However, what it produces in us, instead of a sense of certainty about our existence, knowing that this is coming, that however we fashioned our existence is going to have a expiration date on it, like they have on food in the fridge, expiration date. We have an expiration date on it, but most of us don't know what that is. And some people lay claim to being able to read the expiration date on a human being. I've never seen it done, but I've heard that it can be done by certain types of beings. But let's leave that aside. Instead of producing a certainty of like, okay, death is real, comes with that warning, this body will be a corpse. What should I be doing with the time I have left? it produces usually in almost all of us an uncertainty or kind of dis-ease about our state of mind altogether, about what we take to be real, about what we can trust, what we can't trust, who we can trust, who we can't trust. And some, to the extent that some people, even though we're contemplating something that's just a simple fact of existence, for some of us it will be very distressing even that I'm talking about this tonight. Guaranteed. Whether we're glib about it or not, underlying that there's a sort of a sense that, this is not talked about all that frequently, in a sort of heartfelt and exploratory way. And as I said in the mailer, maybe the only time we are aware of people talking about this is like Woody Allen or Debbie Downer, in terms of, you're bringing everybody down, So like if we were at a cocktail party and we said, what about death? Why don't we talk about that while we're having our cocktails? I don't think you'd be, as I mentioned, I don't think you'd be invited back unless you're a Woody Allen, and then you can do it. So we either have that existential side, maybe that's a third pole of the sort of existential side, or we have avoidance or repression of this area of conversation. So the uncertainty aspect is powerful when you grow up in stressful environment like a war zone or the tsunami or something like that, or in Somalia, someplace where even the basic cause and conditions for any kind of stability in life may be upset. There's a much more sort of sense of uncertainty that's kind of normal. But even for us, living in what was probably one of the more secure, lives of kind of having a good, solid foundation, and many of us have had that. Some of us are experiencing the edges of that, having tasted the expiration date and managed to change the year. I know some of you have done that. But even so, the uncertainty of it is kind of shocking. So, for example, out here in East Hampton last year, we had the daughter of some friends got hit by a car at 14 and died. Maybe about 14 years ago, one of my very best friends on the earth, I was having dinner with him one night out here, and he was in a car accident on the way home. And the next morning, I was saying goodbye to him in the hospital. It wasn't, I called it a typo. Some of these kind of things are like you go, well, this shouldn't have happened. This is a typo. God made a typo, The expiration date was like 40 years, 60 years, 80 years now. Why is this person dying? And it really does stretch us out when we contemplate these kind of things, because we feel like there's somebody stealing that person away, depriving them of a life they should have had. That's an incomplete understanding of what happened. So nobody's being punished, Who would be doing that? You have to really think carefully about that. Do we really live in a demonic universe in which people are punished for bad deeds by some external force? I think that's children's mind. There's a natural movement to things. We're not in a position where we understand everything that's happening, that's for sure. Supposedly a Buddha can. That's one of the attributes of a Buddha, is sort of seeing the three times, the past, present, and future, with clarity, because they're all folded into each other in a way that when you take the egocentricity out of the picture, you see larger patterns, But we normal people, we can't see those things. So, but we can notice, and we can be kind of open-hearted and open-minded to notice that we don't know, why my friend David Nichtern got in a car accident while he was still a young, healthy father, and we don't know why our young friend's young daughter was taken away last year. And then, we have situations where we have some people who are living in such great despair that they take their own lives. That seems like a whole nother kind of typo. where you say you could have this life. It's a beautiful day out. How could you even think of ending your own life in that way? So we're surrounded, personally I've been surrounded by all kinds of variations on this theme. And, then we have an example of somebody like Clara, who I guess is going to be our sort of, centerpiece for the table today, since she just passed away today, who lived to be, we're not sure if she was 90, 91, or 92, but somewhere in that neighborhood, had great-grandchildren, not just great-grandchildren, but great-great-grandchildren, a tremendously rich life. She had a few things, she had a hip replacement and things like that, but basically was, mostly healthy, lost some of her hearing as she grew older, but she didn't lose 1 inch of spirit through any of that I could detect. I'm sure she, had her complaints like the rest of us, but she had a strong spiritual faith, so that made complaining kind of a lesser option, and people see that and they go, well, that was a long, rich life, and she did not have to suffer so much at the end. She had a stroke, and then, really within a week she passed away. So we say that was a good life, But from our point of view, they're all good lives, and they're all perfect in a way, but we can't see it. So that's our limitation, because what we see is our own projection onto it of what we would like that person to be for us, and we're looking at the universe, the cosmos, through the wrong end of the telescope, friends. That's a pretty fair description of ego. Is you're looking at the vast universe of possibilities, but you're looking through the big end, and all you see is tiny little ants and tiny little thingies, So we should, probably you could say some dimension of our spiritual practice is turning the telescope around, so that we can see the big picture. When we see the big picture, our relationship to death and life changes, in the sense that it's possible that we can relax with both of them, open to the full range of experience, and not just see it in relation to how does it make us feel and do, without negating that or denying that. We can expand our sense of reality to a bigger picture. So I see quite a few more people have entered. Obviously, we're talking about death and dying tonight, which is a big topic. But if you want to participate, what you do is you go to your browser, open a second window, and go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and that's where you're going to see a scroll of questions and comments that you can participate in by simply typing in below it. And I invite you to do that at any point. I see there's 34 comments already. Maybe we're lighting up the big board on this one. Quite a few of our wonderful regulars are here. Lama Kunga is here. Hello, Lama. Good to see you. And Lama is showing us the picture of his foot amputated on Saturday. Thank you for sharing that. How are you feeling? I assume that they cut the foot off to save the rest of you, so I hope that's going well. And maybe you could chime in, let everybody know how you're doing. I see John Cunningham is saying maybe if we had a 5-minute coffee break between the main talk and the interactive part, some of us who can only do one thing at a time would be able to gather our thoughts before they escape. David, you can play some music or dance so we know you're still online. And then John is saying, wow, John is really chipping in tonight. He's saying, been rewatching some older talks while I sit here waiting for midnight. And I wanted to I guess you're in England, that would mean. And I wanted to respond to David asking why some of us just lurk in the shadows and don't contribute. For me, almost every week I make attempts to chip in a question, but I just can't think, type, and listen at the same time. So before I have finished my contribution, the talk takes over my attention. Okay, and then John is saying, haha, I found the comments, have been commenting away in the wrong place. No, we see you. Anyway, hi from Edinburgh, it's midnight and fresh. Blessed rain, having followed a very hot and humid day. Okay. Okay, so, the uncertainty of death, in terms of our perspective on seeing it as an intrusion, as a kind of like insult, I think all those things are up for grabs. They're really up for grabs. I mean, really, on some level, who do we think we are? That's a fair question. And it is an insult to ego. I'm going to, like you, if you want to quote, death is very insulting to ego and clinging. So how we handle it really says quite a lot about us, actually. How we handle death is if we're glib about it, if we're too clingy, it's going to it's kind of a mirror. It's a really powerful mirror. But I thought tonight we could look at it also from the point of view of what the hell is it, actually? Because I think that's something that doesn't really often get kind of considered, is literally, there's a book called How We Die. Maybe somebody can look it up and post it. But I'm ready to, I scanned it, but I'm ready to sit down and read it because it's talking about the actual physical process and experience of death. And then there are some very good other books, which maybe some of you can post. I'll recommend two other books. The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche is really good. And it's really good if you're working with dying people or yourself in that situation. A lot of good advice there. And then Judy Leaf, L-I-E-F, who's an Acharya in the Shambhala tradition, is called Making Friends with Death, which is even more outrageous a thing to say. So these are things that we're all, I think when people do talk about something like this, there's a little bit of a threshold to get across, and then it's very, very refreshing, actually. But now we're looking at what is the experience of death and therefore dying, because sometimes people die very suddenly. So it's almost like there's no dying, there's just a living person and then a dead person. So you could say in that situation, like with my friend David Nichtern, that it was very, very fast, short process of dying. Clara had a kind of fairly short process of dying. Some people would say that's a big relief that you don't have to drag it out. Some people we know, it's been stretched out for years and years and years. And sometimes we're the person who's caring for somebody, and we're making the decision, are we going to stretch this out, or are we going to help them along their way? Not an easy decision to make if you're the person who's the next of kin or so forth. The person, each one of us expresses our wishes, in the form of do not resuscitate. Personally, if we're just going to get very practical, I recommend everybody who's listening tonight, if you don't get anything else out of this talk, have a will, make sure you have a will, and a DNR, and I don't care if you're 42 or 62 or 82 or 182 or 22. And in your will, it should say how you want your body disposed of and what you want done with your things, and any spiritual practice you want done in relationship to it, because otherwise it'll be out of your hands. And the DNR, the do not resuscitate, means that, let's say you're really, really sick and maybe dying, and then you have a heart attack. At the hospital, they'll try to revive you, and they may revive you into a state in which you're comatose permanently, and they might put a feeding tube into you also. So you may be hanging out in limbo for a long time. So the DNR is protective of that. And you also might want to consider who is going to, if you get yourself into a difficult situation, who would have the power of attorney to make the decisions that you can't make anymore. And in your will, who's going to execute your will of what happens after you die. So, you think, oh, God, this is really good practical advice, friends. Probably at the level of as good as anything we've talked about in terms of how to live, and bring the spiritual practice all the way down to the ground. How to deal with these parts of experience. But coming back to what happens when we die is obviously, you can read the medical description of this, but the body shuts down one way or another. The body, which is, arguably, depending on your point of view, the kind of vehicle for consciousness, or is the consciousness itself? We'll get into that a little bit later on. That's a big topic in itself, and we spent the last 2 sessions in a way setting up for this by talking about consciousness. So if you're watching this, please go back and look at those two, how ego, structure, and consciousness work from a Buddhist point of view. But clearly the body shifts its relationship to the consciousness as we're dying, and as we die, and then at death. So, some people would say in a quite simplistic way, the consciousness separates from the body. Whatever we think of as consciousness is no longer associated or hanging around and operating that particular physical setup. So in some traditions they say, so-and-so dropped the body. I think when we talk about these things, there's 2 points of view. One is we're either taking it on faith, wishful thinking, that you could drop the body and just go soaring off like a bird, or we might have enough spiritual realization to recognize that that's the case. So if that's the case, you'll teach next Tuesday night's workshop, not me. Or we may be, and this is a very non-cynical point of view, taking the word of somebody we take to be a master in this area, a spiritual master, based on our appraisal of their operation in all other levels of living and dying. Not just because somebody else said so, but we feel that person, whether it's Buddha or a particular Lama or a spiritual teacher of some kind, actually knows. And so therefore, because we have trust and faith in that person, like the Lama, if we're in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we're in a sense accepting their guidance on this matter, or at least willing to consider it seriously. But one way or the other, the body shuts down. And if you study physiology at all, there are certain vital organs without which the body can't continue. If the heart shuts down, we're finished. If the lungs shut down, we're finished. If the kidneys or the liver shuts down, we're finished. However, the brain can shut down a lot of its functions and the body is fine. In fact, arguably, people live for a long time, 5 or 10 years in that state. So eventually, if the body and the brain and the mind and the body get too far apart, even the medical doctors say the person will die. But a lot of brain function, cognitive brain function, can completely be shut down and the body can still be fine. But if any of the vital organs are threatened, or cease to function, the body will shut down. And at that point, they say in the Tibetan tradition, now I'm talking about sort of teachings here. At that point, they say that the outer wind ceases, which is the breath. If you hold your hand in front of the person's nose or mouth, you won't feel anything. But they also say, this would be sort of, I guess, Buddhist medicine approach, that the inner wind, or the prana in the inside of the body, is able to sustain for at least another 10 minutes or so. So the person's not clinically totally dead at that point, from a Buddhist point of view. Which explains how you can revive somebody who's been dead, quote unquote. The outer breath has stopped for 5 minutes, and you give them electroshock, or they may even on their own kick back in. Of course, the damage there is that certain damage may have happened to certain organs, including the brain, so that's why you have to be careful about that. But when the inner wind stops, that's when the person is irreversibly dead at that point. So at that point, the body is going to start shifting its relationship to itself. And pretty quickly, in most cases, the body begins to become cold and harder. So that's called rigor mortis. And that's when we ordinary people die. That's what happens to us. So that's not always what happens when somebody with a lot of realization dies. And we've seen this with our own eyes, so we're not just talking about fantasies here. But in the general sense, that the body is sort of, in a sense, the mind and the body relationship is based on a kind of terror and panic that happens about losing that ground. We're so familiar with this ground. And rigor mortis sets in. The body becomes, gets cold to the touch. And there's a feeling of the whatever it was that was animating that person, this sort of spiritual consciousness dimension, sort of departing. You can sort of feel it. Some people who are not even particularly Buddhist or spiritual, whatever, you sort of almost feel like the person's leaving the room, as you experienced their mind and their consciousness. So at that point, you could say, from whatever angle you want to come at this, that the consciousness and the physical body are separating. And like in Star Trek, when the saucer separates from the ship, and when they've separated to a certain extent, you obviously can't rejoin them. Right? Now, so we should look at each component. Body and mind are clearly interactive for the time we're alive. Like, if I pinch you really hard, I'm pinching your mind too. You're going to jump and you're going to get pissed off at me. So there's going to be, not a complete separation between the body and mind, but they're highly interactive. They're not completely together, but they're very, very interactive for most of us. So the mind and the consciousness, I want to give you a simple illustration to show that it's not the same as the body. And take the most simple example of, I get these hangnails. Probably some of you get a hangnail. And I could go, wow, I'm really having a bad day today. This is, just a little hangnail. It's kind of nothing. But it begins to ground up your consciousness into hamburger. And, nothing anybody could say or do could cheer you up, or a cold, or a cough, So the smallest physical aberration or disturbance can, depending on our state of mind and our ability to work with our mind, create a tidal wave, a tsunami of disturbance in our consciousness. On the flip side, we have somebody can go through a serious physical change, can have a serious physical disease, and the mind is not moving that much. One person's mind could be moving less who has a serious disease than another person's mind who has a hangnail. So obviously the consciousness is separate from the body in that sense, that there is different type of reactivity in each situation. They're not necessarily calibrated uniformly that way. So we talked, as I mentioned, about the 8 levels of consciousness and how we begin to collect a sense of self from our experience and input, and that sense of self at the 7th consciousness, which is the klesha consciousness, begins to become identified with all kinds of moods and feelings and habits. And that's where ego is kind of like spawned. If it was like that movie Aliens, where they find the nest for the aliens, and there's the big mother there, and all the little babies. That's like the 7th consciousness. They're all like spawning, and that's where our perceptions, our energy gets colored, gets distorted by kleshas, by aggression, by neediness, by a sense of stupor or delusion. So the consciousness has different layers to it. And the point of the talk 2 weeks ago is that actually nowhere in that consciousness is embedded a notion of self. This is like, if you want to really try to understand Buddhism, that was the big thing, is that the notion of self, to try to define it, find it, other than as a relative interdependent phenomenon, but any kind of permanent notion of self, any self-existing notion of self, gets destroyed in the process of practicing Buddhism or becoming Buddha. And it doesn't get destroyed because it has such a firm existence. It gets destroyed because it never existed in the first place. So that, of course, when people say, well, I'm going to get rid of my ego, that's to me the biggest, that's like a Buddhist joke. Because who's going to get rid of your ego? So, we have to look carefully at what we mean when we're talking about myself, especially if we're talking about death and dying. What is it that's going to die? And how much that's changing even as we move towards death. And how sometimes people, as they're moving towards death, can relax their notion of self from a tight, kind of clenched fist idea about it to more open, spacious. When people can do that, they usually have a better experience dying. You can see it. If somebody's really tight and going, I'm losing everything, it's me, I'm losing, then there's that kind of panic. So we're saying, well, wait a minute, let's just start with the premise that this is a universal message here. Like, on Johnny Carson, death is nature's way of telling us to let go. And in a sense, you could say, to open that clenched fist of ego and realize that it's based on a false sense of identity. So it's not so much a question of us as the Meister controller getting rid of this bad thing, I think that's how a lot of people sort of mistake the notion of ego. Yeah, I have this bad thing, I'm eyeing the great whatever, I'm going to get rid of it. It's more unwinding. They say it's like you take a rope and it's knotted, and you just throw it up in the air and it unknots in the air. That's more like the notion of understanding egolessness than somebody sitting there meticulously untying the knot, and the person who unties the knot is now this giant ego thing called Buddha. So death is profound, in terms of what it throws us up against, and even the idea of like wanting to undo it, wanting to make sense out of it, wanting to make it a good thing, like I know with our friend whose daughter passed away, a lot of people said she's in a very special place, she's advising us, who knows? I don't know if those people know what they're talking about. But it's just ordinary. That happened. There's nothing that we can do to make it unhappen. And we are entitled to feel what we feel. So, whatever feelings come up, this is nothing in what I'm going to say is a way of saying we're not supposed to feel sad or lonely or anxious or depressed. But, the extent to which we solidify those into a permanent metaphysics or philosophy is what's, really being questioned here. So, I'll just say a couple of things you can read about this stuff. If you want another great book to read, obviously, is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Todol, which describes the in-between state between death and birth, of all kinds, not just the physical death, but all kinds of endings and beginnings, and the gap between them, quality of space between them. So, very briefly in the Bardo Todol, and this is now, we're specifically in the Buddhist point of view, you certainly do not have to swallow this whole or repeat it as if, now you know what you're talking about. I'm just telling you what the masters have said about this. Okay, the body goes into its final death experience. The consciousness of the person at the moment of death, they say, at that very moment, has recognized the potential to recognize its own nature. The consciousness is clear, luminous, you could say beyond time, I think, primordial. And we have that experience, actually, by the way, we have it when we're alive, but at death there's a really tremendously powerful reveal, you could say, of the background of our whole experience. It's like the background moves into the foreground. And supposedly if you train in meditation and can recognize that as your own truer nature rather than the sort of balled up I, me, mine kind of thing, you can achieve full liberation in that moment. So a lot of sort of more advanced Buddhist teachings is how to do that. And consciousness is liberated from any need, you could say, to form another storyline, another narrative, another personal narrative. However, out of momentum and force, since that moment is missed, what they say is that we go into a kind of blackout, a dullness, in which there's kind of not a lot of active mind going on for about 3 days. I don't know if these times are that literal, but that's how they're presented. And then we sort of wake up into the intermediate state, in which our sense of body is very different, and the analogy is like a dream. Like in a dream you have a sense of body that's not your actual physical body, right? We might be running around or flying or dropping from one scene to the next. So we wake up in a sort of intermediate state like that, in which our consciousness is very, very sensitive, and what they say is 7 times more sensitive than the when we're grounded in the body situation. So if we're experiencing anguish or fear, it's going to be very, very intense. If we're experiencing kind of the vividness of life and communication and joy, it's going to be very, very intense. And the basic premise is we haven't really allowed ourselves to experience that level of vividness and intensity. We've dumbed that down. Talk about dumb and dumber, dim and dimmer, It's just so vivid, And it's no different, by the way, than hearing that bird chirp right now or seeing the light in the room right now. No different than being alive right now. But the veil has been lifted. So when we experience that, most often for most of us, we experience some kind of fear and panic about the intensity of that experience. And just a brief summary, then they say that the kind of peaceful energies, the more benign, the more benevolent energy of this kind of egoless space, which is called the peaceful deities, appear to us. And they are none other than the expression of our own nature beyond ego, beyond the sort of narrow sense of self. This is a kind of more expanded notion of our own energy. And we still can't recognize it. It's too bright. Literally, the notion of light comes up. It's too bright, so we kind of shy away. Then a more kind of ruthless quality of that, or a more penetrating quality, the wrathful deities, comes up. Suppose there are 50 of each of these, and then attempts to cut through our confusion. It's like it's like my dad when he was trying to wake me up in high school. First it's very benevolent, and then it's like you start to shake the person. Wake up, wake up. It's kind of like that in a way. And when we don't recognize our nature all the way through that experience, then we see what they say is the dim lights, much dimmer down, of the 6 realms, which is what yours truly is almost finishing his book about right now. So there's talks on that. You can look those up if you want, or maybe somebody can post what that, they talk about the 6 realms. and we begin to like kind of move towards a more narrow, incarnated, in a body situation, focused, into a particular environment, a particular karmic situation that's simply a product of our previous seventh and eighth consciousnesses, in terms of the seeds, the imprints, the kind of feelings, textures, the flow of our karmic energy. So this might seem a little abstract to some of us, but that's okay. And we move towards a new situation, a new life, and we incarnate. So obviously this is the kind of level at which we would move into. Everybody's going to maybe have a different take on this particular part of it. And it's not really the focus. The focus is, why are we so afraid of death? Why are we so afraid of it when it's inevitable? Why do we view it as a tragedy? Why are we so afraid of our own feelings about it? Why don't we want to talk about it? Something as ordinary as that, as powerful as that, as penetrating as that. So I think at that point there's so much more I can say about it from the, obviously from the traditional teachings. But let's talk about it. I know probably some of you are buzzing out there, and please, every kind of question, comment is welcome. Very powerful topic. Again, to participate, go to your browser, open a second window, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and let's use the rest of the time together to have a little chat about this. So I'm going to look. You have to refresh that browser every once in a while. And I know some of you are going to have some juicy things to say. So let's take a look. Okay, so Joe is here, and after 2 funerals already this week. Grateful to practice with David. Wow, Joe. I have a theory that May and June are dying months, and I haven't looked this up statistically yet. Maybe one of you can. Springtime, everything's coming back to life, and some of us are not going to, and we go, good time to check out. So I myself have also been, a lot of that kind of energy is around right now. T.S. Eliot wrote, "April is the cruelest month, mixing memory with desire." Are we going to go on again? It's a cycle. Are we going to go through again? So you have condolences from us, Joe, but it makes the topic particularly juicy, I'm sure. Lama Kunga is saying, doing very well, good doctors, much meditation on acceptance. Great. All right, good to hear that. Thank you for chipping that information in. And I hope that continues. Rebecca, while we're gathering, just wanted to mention that I started reading Born in Tibet by Chogyam Trungpa today. Quite extraordinary. Oh yeah, the beginning of our story. If you're looking at the narrative of this particular Sangha, that's a great place to go. Kathleen is saying, I read glimpses of Abhidharma at your suggestion. I think I need to read it a few more times. Or maybe a few hundred. But thank you for pointing me there, Rebecca. Fascinating. And Dharmatard is saying, yes, thank you, Rebecca. Okay. Kathleen Sullivan is saying, I'm reading Joan Halifax's lovely book, Being with Dying, in hopes to prepare for the death of a relative who is very ill. Okay, another good recommendation. Maria is saying hi from Buenos Aires. Stephanie Saba, in the midst of packing for Bhakti Fest Midwest. See you there, David. I will be there, just in case any of you, the rest of you are going to be there playing guitar with Krishnadas. So I will be there for the weekend. If any of you are there, and if we haven't met, you got to come up and say hello. Please do that. So let's see what other folks are saying. Yeah, Christy is saying excellent guidance on having a will and DNR, do not resuscitate order. Thank you. Yeah, somehow we put that off, but it's a good thing to get taken care of. You feel better. So Dharmatard is saying, last year I had 5 people and 1 cat die within a couple of months. Be interesting what time of year it was. This was an ungrounding time for sure, but it made me turn more attention to this topic. In fact, I talk about death often. Good thing my partner is Buddhist too. I volunteer at a hospice now, partly to bring whatever peace I can to the situation, partly for my own exploration. I hope to make friends with the inevitable, and when the time comes for me, to let go completely. I see fear in everyone who I've watched die. That's really a powerful experience you've had there. And I hope I can make peace with this for myself. Maybe even for somebody else too someday. Really good wish there, Dharma. Ari said, phew, with her cello. Finally logged on. Have been listening since I finished class. As always, I wish we could talk for 2 hours. Hi, everyone. That's an interesting thought. I think we're going to start doing some workshops soon. So it's maybe this fall. Smaller groups of people, more talking. Keep your eyes open for that. Okay. Trina. Hi, has been watching from the Bronx. That may be a first. I'm glad to see you out there. The Bronx. It's where my grandparents are from. Special residence there. Weeks Avenue. All right. John, I think we talked about a little bit. Okay. Shayna saying, so sorry for the loss of your beloved Clara. Thank you, Shayna. You can take her place, okay, in terms of the sweetheart faction. Okay, let's see. Susan Roebuck. Hi, everyone. David, I'm so sorry to hear of your loss. Love and blessings to you and all that knew her. Thank you. Conrad is saying, hear that bird on your porch. It sounds like a chipping sparrow. Yeah, there's a number of different birds out here, Neil. Are you a bird watcher? Ornithologist? Is that what it's called? Mark Korchesny. I have experienced the death and dying of many family members and friends, but I never had a more enlightened experience than a lengthy exercise contemplating my own death and the death of my living loved ones in Fearlessness in Everyday Life program. Great. Wow. Yeah, so that's, by the way, just in case you don't know, that's a course that's given at the Shambhala centers that's sort of between the levels of Shambhala training, and you can take it online or live. So if that's not a good reason to take Shambhala training, I'll give you 30 others. Okay. Marie Rendon Henry is saying, about 10 years ago I volunteered at a children's grief center and facilitated a group of young children who had lost a sibling. I had to stop because my husband was ill and eventually died. A few years ago my mother and a dear uncle died. What I learned through observation of others and my own experience is that a part of one disappears when there is a loss. Sometimes that part comes back, maybe altered, and sometimes it doesn't. What do the Buddhist teachings say about this? Wow. Well, go back 2 weeks, Marie, and if you didn't see the talk on the 5 skandhas and the kind of components of self and consciousness, basic Buddhist point of view, you hear the bird, is that we are already bundles of things gathered together in a kind of looser way than we might imagine, even at the level of the number of sentient beings that compose our physical body, of which we seem to be the CEO but not the sole member. So the notion of having a kind of energy with somebody, and that just, I call it rooms. Maybe this will help you, Marie. It's like people have, if my heart was a hotel, it has like 165 rooms, let's say. And certain people, they live in one of those rooms, whether they're alive or dead. And that room, if they pass away and you're not actively engaging that communication, that room can be sort of, the lights go out in that room. Maybe the whole wing of the hotel is closed for a while. So, and then maybe another one opens. And I think that kind of being willing to look at yourself as not just one integrated thingy thing, and made up of all these interdependent relationships that come and go. And of course, when somebody leaves, part of you leaves with them. Now, more literally, I've experienced if somebody close to you dies, my experience has been they're walking off. They're leaving this theater of operation. And I see it like when a good friend of mine's father died, I had the vision of him walking down the road away from the house where the funeral was going on. And walked part of the way with him. And if you're very close to that person, it feels like you're leaving a little bit. So I know people who, when somebody close to them dies, they themselves look like they're in the Bardo a little bit for a while or a long time. But they come back. The other person does not come back. So if we find ourselves, in whole going down that road, we have to, engage some kind of experience that's more connected to our current living situation. But I think what you're saying is just totally natural. That's the way I experience it too. Patrick is saying, "Hi David, glad to see you today. This topic's on my mind as a friend died suddenly, unexpectedly on Sunday." Wow. Ah! Rebecca is saying, "David, I actually experienced your death in a dream just a couple of weeks ago." Wow. The 16th Karmapa said to Jamgon Rinpoche as he was weeping when the news of Sister Pamo's death was received, impermanence. And regarding his own death, Karmapa said, "Nothing happens." I'll be contemplating these words probably till my own death, whenever that is, whatever that is. Typically, I think of death as pretty ordinary. I don't mind at all discussing it, and often do with many people. Well, have you been invited to a lot of parties lately, Rebecca? I've seen photos of highly realized masters staying in the meditation posture for days after official death. And I've also heard of rainbow body. Could you say some words about that? Well, as usually we don't have a huge amount of time to get into that level of conversation, but to just say a brief thing about it. Trungpa Rinpoche, who was my teacher, as well as Karmapa 16, clearly demonstrated, and many other of the great lamas, Kalu Rinpoche and others, demonstrate at the time of death, sort of, you could say, their kind of quality of realization. The form that usually takes is that they're said to be in samadhi, or a state of meditation. They can hold it, for a period of time. How long they can hold it is considered to be according to the level of realization. Some of those teachers have not been burned, but are sitting up in a stupa. It's very rare, but that happens. Trungpa Rinpoche sat up on a throne for about 5 or 6 days after he died. Heart center still warm. Then gradually you could feel him kind of leaving the space on any level. I've talked about it before, very dramatic events at his cremation, a couple of months later. So there are many, many descriptions of these kind of things, somewhat esoteric in terms of the modern Western picture of it, somewhat trippy if we talk about it too much in the wrong context. But the general notion is that there's the potential to develop a relationship to death that shifts the physical chemistry of it. So that's powerful. And it has to do with meditative capacity. If we can hold our mind steady even through a hangnail, let's start there. Or through an irritable 2-year-old, let's start there. And then if we can hold our mind steady in terms of not being so freaked out by life, then that's a very good place to start. The rainbow body is, let's talk about that another time. You and I can talk about that when we talk tomorrow. Chrissy Kavitsky says, "Where do we go?" Christy, you're so cute. Where do we go? Oh, that is, I don't know why, but that just really makes me laugh. It's like a kid or something like that. It reminds me of like when a kid's on a car trip, is like, "Are we there yet?" They say that. And the shortest answer probably is, there are so many subtle levels to where we are right now. I'd recommend working on that equation. Is where are you? Let's forget about where you go. Where are you? And do it right now. Scan, figure out where the hell you are. What is this thing called you, and where is it, and what color is it, and what shape is it? do that kind of thing. We'll do that, Christy, the next time we talk one-to-one, okay? Remind me, and we'll do that little exercise of where are you. Let's see. Maybe we have time for one more question if somebody's got a good one. Okay, Sarah, you got it. I agree with your theory. Just lost a friend to cancer and laid him to rest yesterday. I also cared for my mother when she was dying from terminal cancer, and what you explained about the consciousness towards the end is so accurate to what she described was happening to her. She had a few days of dullness or blackness and felt like she was in between worlds. She described it, and then the day of her death she was alert and did not want any pain medication, was more aware than I had seen her since she was diagnosed. She left with her hands open. Wow. Sarah, I think we're going to give you the last word tonight on that. That's good food for thought there. Let's take a moment and maybe send out our good heart to Clara Taylor and any of the other folks that we're thinking about here tonight who are living or dying, but particularly in terms of having some kind of relationship to the death process or sickness, and recognize that their well-being is something we can hold into our own heart space and open more to caring for each other as the best kind of representation of making the best out of this life that we have. So it means a lot to me that you all have shown up tonight and do regularly and are sharing so much, in this forum, which is kind of a virtual forum. People, I feel, are being very, very open-hearted and contributing a lot to it. It's extremely meaningful to me. And we have to think of a good topic. I won't be around next Tuesday night, so we're skipping next Tuesday, and then we're pretty good going through July. Probably at the beginning of August, I'm doing my own retreat up in Nova Scotia, so if you're bookmarking that, the first 2 weeks of August I won't be around, but nothing next week, following week, and then we continue on. If you have any good topics, let me know. Any good ideas? I might be doing a little teaching out in the East End here. I'm going to possibly doing a little teaching out at Mandala Yoga in July, if we can hook that up. And if I see you at Bhakti Fest, that'll be great. And so, lots of love to everybody. Have a good evening. Enjoy your time together with whoever you're with. And see you in 2 weeks. Hasta la vista.